Hello, it's Keith Morrison. I apologize for not being there in person. I'm grateful and honored to be able to present like this. This paper was produced after 4 years, 4 semesters teaching at USP over 2014 and 2015. Heena was the RSD coordinator at the time, and Moleen Nand was my teaching assistant. I had the challenge of providing online postgraduate courses for leadership and sustainable development, including climate change adaptation. And as part of that, had to embed the newly rolled out research skill development framework. But because I had to produce online postgraduate courses, I had to do it with also embed self-regulated learning. So that was the challenge. Now I could see that there are 2 main approaches to take to do this. One was to see that the whole of each of the courses had to be enhanced with research skill development, which meant that the research skill development had to be unique for each course. Well, the other approach was to delineate which aspects were research skills and which aspects were not, and therefore could work out some generic set of what the research skills were that needed to be developed in the courses. I opted for the first option because I found that the research skill development framework was very similar to the models for self-regulated learning and the leadership theories. Therefore, if self-regulated learning and leadership had to be throughout the whole of the courses, research skill development might as well be as well. There are 2 main aspects to models for leadership, and this was the entry point to develop how to do this. There's transactional leadership, which is about gaining autonomy and authority. And you can see there's some link there to the research skill development framework about increasing autonomy. But there's also transformative leadership, which is more about being for others. It's about empowerment of others. It's to recognize and nurture the potential contribution of leadership that others also have. I could see very clearly that transformative leadership fitted in very well with the well-being approach to sustainable development, that it's about enabling development for everybody. So I saw that it had to be transformative leadership, but I could also see that that didn't mean that transactional leadership had to be rejected. Rather more, transactional leadership was the entry point or the beginning or foundation for developing transformative leadership. Sort of like, to empower others, you have to be empowered first yourself. And then with self-regulated learning, found that that also emphasizes the need for engagement with others. In fact, it argues that engagement with others bootstraps autonomy, bootstraps the ability to learn and be self-motivated. And that engagement is with peers, with fellow students, with teachers, and with a community and cultural context, but also with oneself, through one's tacit knowledge of metacognitive processes or way one learns. So this is how I modeled the process. Autonomy and engagement are related both ways. Self-regulated learning says that engagement leads to autonomy, whereas leadership argues that autonomy leads to engagement. The other thing which needs to be included is that self-regulated learning talks about how supportive feedback nurtures feed forward, and feed forward is related to autonomy. And supportive feedback is through engagement with others, in particular with the teacher. So this was the model which was used. And in the focus of the interaction between the engagement between the student and the teacher, the important thing is that teachers are to provide supportive feedback, which then nurtures the student feed forward. And also, teachers improve the knowledge of students' tacit metacognitive processes by providing models. Models to help reflect the student on their learning processes. That's when I realized that the research skill development framework is just an example of one of these models. It helps students reflect on that. Therefore, I must actually give all that information to the students, which I did in the first week. But also I could see that it was incomplete and inadequate. And there were other models which I was more used to, which complemented it, critically complemented it. One was triple loop learning and the other was critical pedagogy. So for the first semester, I taught these courses. Of course, I just gave these three models and left it to the students to integrate them and synthesize them, even though there was some incoherence in the process. For the second semester, I produced my own synthesis of how they three can operate together. We're all very aware of this research skill development framework. What I want to emphasize is its limitation, but also its strength, and that is the spiral which it tells of, the spiraling through the facets of research which all have to be working in together, and how they spiral upwards, up the levels. Now that's very compelling, but it's, I think, overly simplistic. So I had to complement it with some other detail. One is found in triple loop learning, where within that cycle around the facets of learning, there's nested cycles, nested loops going on, because there's the single loop learning focusing on the technical issues of research. There's the double loop learning, which is the aspects of juxtaposing different perspectives and paradigms. And then there's a triple loop learning of focusing on the purpose of it, of why you're doing the research at all. Now, they're all there in the facets of research and research skill development framework, but showing that they're actually nested and you go in and out of them. It's not a steady, simple spiral. The other thing which had to include was that the process of research discovery and learning is jumpy. There's ruptures involved. It's far more like as the Noblest found from ecology, talking about how things develop, they come to a peak and then they collapse, and out of that chaos new ideas come. And there can be multiple of these going on at the same time. That's more a realistic experience of the research process and also the learning process. So I had to include this so the students had a realistic model in which to reflect on what they were going through. For the second semester, I put these three together, and that was what we have here, that there's increasing autonomy, but there's also increasing dialogue, and they occur at the same time. One goes towards individuation and the feed forward. The other goes to engagement, showing respect, appreciation, compassion. And that process is a focusing from the technical issues through to the critical issues, where it's constructivist more, where you recognize the relativity of different approaches, through to the spirituality, which is like the deeper traditional cultural knowledge, where you actually come into contact with some universal features of ethics. So this then is a synthesis I produced to help the students in their process. The provision of feedback, supportive feedback, didn't change through the whole 4 semesters. Using Moodle Marksheet very effectively based on the research skill development framework, was able to give repeated supportive feedback. The only thing I had to be careful about was just reminding some examiners, or not examiners, markers early on, that they needed to be supportive. It wasn't about judgment, it was about enabling students to continue to learn. So it always enabled them to resubmit and so on. What did develop over the 4 semesters was enabling the engagement processes through online. There isn't really time to go into all those details, but it's all written up in the paper, which I hope you'll all be able to read. What we did do in the 4th semester was do a pre-post test of whether there was research skill development in that last semester. We had a null hypothesis that there wasn't, and the alternative hypothesis was that there was some improvement. We had 62% participation in the pre-survey and 53% in the post-survey, and we gave ordinal values to the answers. The questions were the same for the pre and the post. The results showed that there were 90% showed a significant, which we defined as a p-value of less than 0.1, improvement in research skills. And for 70% of the questions, they showed a very significant, which we defined as a p-value of less than 0.05, improvement in research skill. Each of the questions had some bearing to the research facets, and they were grouped into 6 groups. And we also made sure each question was focused on what it meant for that particular course, because we took the approach that this was, the research was throughout the whole course. It wasn't as they defined in the first slide. The only 2 questions which didn't show any significant improvement were in relating to constructing tables and figures. So these are things which were overlooked in the course, and they weren't taught. And the reason is because of the approach taken. So maybe there is a place for delineating what are research skills and what aren't, and just things which aren't deemed to be research skills still should be taught, and make sure that they're also covered. So in conclusion, no, we can't conclude what caused the success of that research skill development. There's no control, there's no replication. We can't say it was because of the embedding of the research skill development framework. We can't say it was because of doing it by also embedding self-regulated learning. We don't know what was the cause. It could just be that that particular subject always leads to research skill development. We don't know. What we can say, though, is that we discovered that it is possible to produce online delivery of postgraduate courses that embed both research skill development and self-regulated learning for leadership. And that's an important finding itself, because that's hopeful, because it's so important for USP to be able to provide professional courses for leadership, postgraduate level, throughout the region with purely online means, which enhance research skills as well as leadership.